Today, we are tackling one of history's biggest, boldest, and, well, frankly, most terrifying experiments, the French Revolution. And we're not just talking about a simple rebellion here. No, this was a full-on attempt to just wipe the slate clean, to erase 1,000 years of tradition and build a totally new world from scratch, all based on these incredible new ideas of liberty and reason. But where do we start? Well, let's actually jump in near the end. The year is 1794. It's July. And we're inside this grim Parisian prison called the Conciergerie. I mean, this place was a medieval fortress, and people called it Death's antechamber. It's where the revolution sent its enemies for their last stop before the guillotine. And the man waiting for that blade today? None other than Maximilien Robespierre. Think about this. Just a few days ago, this guy's voice could hold the entire nation in a trance. He was the revolution.
And wow, did he fall fast. His downfall was just swift and brutal. His jaw? It's been shattered by a bullet, so the great speaker is silenced. The very man who sent thousands to their deaths is now about to face that exact same fate. And, this one moment, it just captures the whole terrifying paradox of this thing. A movement that was all about liberating people had started eating its own.
So, that's really the big question we're trying to answer here, isn't it? How on earth did a fight for these incredible ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, how did that spiral into just pure paranoia and bloodshed? To figure that out, we've got to rewind. We have to go back to the world that created this revolution in the first place. All right, Section 1, a kingdom in crisis. We're talking about the old world of France. So let's jump back to the 1770s. Now, if you were looking at France from the outside, you'd think it was the center of the universe, the glittering heart of Western civilization. But underneath all that gold and glitter, the foundations of the kingdom were basically rotting away. And right at the very top of it all, you've got two people who are just dangerously, completely out of touch. First, there's King Louis XVI. He's barely 20 years old, he's super shy, can't make a decision to save his life, and he even prayed, "Protect us, Lord, for we reign too young." I mean, wow. Then you've got his wife, Marie Antoinette, an Austrian princess who's even younger, and she's way more interested in the fantasy world of high fashion and court gossip than, the actual problems of the country. They were basically teenagers playing dress-up as king and queen, while their entire kingdom was falling apart around them. Okay, so the real core problem here was how French society was built. It was split into these three rigid classes. They called them estates. Now, get this. The first two, the clergy and the nobility, made up just 3% of the population. But they owned most of the land, had all the power, and paid practically zero taxes. So who was footing the bill for everything? You guessed it, the other 97%. Everybody else, the third estate. The entire weight of the country was on their shoulders. The system wasn't just unfair, it was completely fundamentally broken. So you really had two totally different countries living side by side. On one hand, you have the Palace of Versailles. Life there was just a non-stop show of insane excess. Marie Antoinette got herself the nickname Madame Deficit because she spent so much on jewels and these crazy towering hairdos. And then, just 12 miles away in Paris, you have a totally different world. The price of bread, and I mean bread was everything to the French diet, was just going through the roof. People weren't just poor, they were literally starving to death. And to top it all off, the crown was flat broke. Decades of this over-the-top spending, plus the huge bill for helping out the Americans in their revolution, had plunged France into a catastrophic amount of debt. We're talking 2 billion livres. To put that in perspective, that's enough money to feed and house 7 million French citizens for an entire year. The kingdom wasn't just in trouble, it was bankrupt. Section 2, the people rise up, the spark of 1789. So by the time we get to 1789, the pressure is just unbearable. You've got years of people going hungry, years of injustice, and now you throw in these electrifying new ideas from the Enlightenment, about individual rights and the people having the power. It was a revolutionary powder keg, and the fuse was lit. And man, when it finally exploded, things happened so fast it would make your head spin. In May, the king, totally desperate for money, calls a meeting of the Estates General. But when the third estate, remember, the 97%, gets locked out, they don't go home. Nope, they head over to a nearby tennis court and swear an oath not to leave until they've written a new constitution. Just like that, they call themselves the National Assembly. Then on July 14th, word gets out that the king's army might be coming to crush them, so the people of Paris storm the Bastille prison, this huge, hated symbol of the king's tyranny. You know, there's this famous story that when an aide told the king the Bastille had fallen, the king asked, "Is it a revolt?" And the aide's reply just changed everything. He said, "No, sire, it is a revolution." And he was right. The people had stood up to their king and won. There was absolutely no turning back now. Okay, Section 3, Republic Born in Blood. This is where the violence really escalates. So the fall of the Bastille, it unleashed this huge tidal wave of change. But that initial hopeful dream of, a peaceful new government with the king still around, yeah, that was about to get washed away by something much more radical and much more bloody. So what about the king in all this? Well, first, he made a huge mistake. He tried to escape. In 1791, the whole royal family dressed up as servants and made a run for the border, but they got caught. And that move, it just shattered any last shred of trust the people had in him. Now, he wasn't just a bad king, he was a traitor. It wasn't long after that the monarchy was totally abolished, and the French Republic was born. From there, the final step was pretty much inevitable. Louis XVI was put on trial for treason, and in January 1793, he was executed. And his execution was carried out by this new invention that would become the most terrifying symbol of the whole revolution, the guillotine. But here's the crazy, ironic part. At first, the guillotine was seen as this big humanitarian step forward. See, in the old days, nobles got a quick death by beheading, but commoners, they faced these awful, long, drawn-out tortures. The guillotine was meant to be a great equalizer, a democratic death machine, the same quick, supposedly humane death for everybody, no matter who you are. Next up, the revolution devours itself. We're talking about the Reign of Terror. With the king gone, France is now at war with pretty much the rest of Europe. And the new government is just gripped by this intense paranoia. They start seeing enemies everywhere, outside the borders, and more importantly, inside. And this fear, it's about to lead to the darkest chapter of the entire revolution. And they actually called it the Terror. This small council of 12 men, the Committee of Public Safety, basically takes over, and it's led by the fanatical energy of Robespierre. What do? They suspend the brand new constitution, tossing aside the very rights that they had just fought and died for. Their goal, as they put it, was to use terror as a weapon to cleanse France of its enemies, whether those enemies were real or just imagined. And this right here, this was Robespierre's chilling justification for it all. He basically argued that to build a new, perfect, virtuous republic, you first had to get rid of anyone who wasn't virtuous. In his twisted way of thinking, terror wasn't the enemy of liberty, it was the tool you had to use to create it. It's a philosophy that was about to drown the streets of Paris in blood. And the result of that philosophy was a period we now call the Great Terror. The pace of the executions just became relentless. Think about this. In Paris alone, at the peak of this madness, they were guillotining almost 800 people every single month. The rumble of the death carts became a normal daily sound in the city. So who were these victims? Well, first, it was the obvious targets, like the Queen, Marie Antoinette. But pretty soon, the definition of an enemy just kept getting wider and wider. It started to include fellow revolutionaries like Shore's Danton, just because he dared to say, hey, maybe this has gone too far. It included thousands of ordinary people, maybe turned in by a neighbor because they just didn't seem enthusiastic enough about the revolution. The terror just ate up everyone in its path. Until finally, it came for the man who started it all. Our final section, a legacy of liberty, and the question that remains. So when Robespierre himself was executed in July 1794, the terror finally came to an end. But the revolution he'd been such a huge part of, well, it had already changed the world forever. And it left behind a legacy that is both incredibly powerful and incredibly complicated. Because you have to remember, for all the horror, the French Revolution was a massive turning point in history. It completely obliterated a system of kings and nobles that had been around for 1,000 years. For the very first time, these big ideas, liberty, equality, democracy, they weren't just things philosophers wrote about in books. They were the actual founding principles of a major country. It really created a blueprint, a model for people fighting against tyranny all over the world. And that's the key takeaway, really. The terror itself died with Robespierre. for the ideas of the revolution. They were out of the box and they weren't going back in. This belief that regular people could actually govern themselves, that the power belongs to the nation and not some king, these ideas were now a permanent part of the world. They would outlive all the revolutionaries and all of their victims. Which brings us right back to that fundamental and frankly haunting question that the French Revolution just forces us to look at. Do people have the right to overthrow a system that's unjust? And if they do, how much violence is okay to use to build a better world? They struggled with that question back in 18th century France, and it's a question that is just as real and just as urgent for all of us today.